Okay, that seems to be running. Scroll number 6. The story is starting to get exciting, but with the spots of blood in the street, I have to tell you the story is about to get a lot darker. So be ready. Scroll number 6. The spots of blood, each about the size of a small coin, were a startling and vivid red. Flavia stooped to touch one, but Jonathan ran ahead, following the drops to his front door. "Father, the door's open," he called over his shoulder. "Don't go in," shouted Mordecai. "There may be robbers still in the house." But he was too late. Jonathan had disappeared inside. Mordecai and Miriam hurried forward. As they reached the door, Jonathan stepped back out, his face drained of all colour. He looked at them silently for a moment, and then bent over and was sick in the road. "Stay back, everyone," began Mordecai in alarm, but Miriam had already rushed past him. Her scream broke the stillness of the afternoon. "He's dead," they heard her sob. Mordecai rushed after her into the house. Flavia, Nubia and Scuto all moved forward to follow him, but Jonathan's arm, surprisingly strong, blocked the way. "It's our watchdog, Bobus," he said quietly. "You don't want to look. Somebody has cut off his head and taken it away." "Who else was in your house?" asked Flavia an hour later. She and Nubia were sitting with Jonathan in her garden, trying to comfort him. Miriam had been so upset by the bloodstain on the floor that Mordecai had taken her across town to stay with relatives for a few days. Nubia had one arm around Scuto's neck. They had managed to make her understand what had happened to Bobus, and she seemed determined to protect Scuto from a similar fate. "No one else was in our house," Jonathan answered grimly. "What about the slaves?" "We don't have any slaves. My father doesn't think it's right to keep them." "But you told me your mother died when you were very young. Don't you even have a nursemaid or cook?" "No, it's just the 3 of us." "Well, who does your cleaning?" gasped Flavia in amazement. "I do," said Jonathan, almost proudly. "And I garden. Miriam does the shopping and a little cooking. And Bobus was our doorkeeper and protector." He bit his lip, and Flavia said quickly, "Was anything stolen?" "No. After we buried Bobus's body in the garden, we looked everywhere, but nothing is missing. In fact, I found this in the atrium, not far from his body." He held out a little quartz cube with circles scratched in its surface. Nubia took it from his hand and looked at it in puzzlement. "What, this?" asked Nubia. "It's one of a pair of dice," explained Flavia. "She mimed throwing it and said in Greek, for gambling, for money." "It's not ours," said Jonathan. "My father would be very upset if he ever found me or my sister gambling." "Keep it safe," said Flavia, handing it back to him. "It may be a clue." She looked up at the fig tree thoughtfully. "If nothing was stolen, why did they kill Bobus?" "Well," Jonathan began, and then stopped. He pulled a twig off a bush and scratched idly at the ground. "Why? Tell me," insisted Flavia. She thought of pretty Bobus with his lovely brown eyes and friendly nature. You've guessed that we are different from you. We have a different religion." "You're Jewish, aren't you?" said Flavia. Jonathan nodded. "The people where we used to live didn't like us. That's why we moved here, to the edge of town, where no one would know who we were, where no one would bother us. Our old neighbours wrote things on the wall of our house, and once they threw rotten eggs at Father." "Do you think your old neighbours killed Bobus?" "Maybe," shrugged Jonathan. He seemed reluctant to talk about it. "Why do they hate you so much?" Flavia asked. "There are many Jews here in Ostia. I've seen their temple down by the docks." "At synagogue," corrected Jonathan quietly, and continued to scratch at the ground. It was obvious the subject made him feel uncomfortable. "Well, I intend to solve this crime," announced Flavia firmly. "Whoever did this is wicked and should be caught." Nubia had been listening to their conversation attentively. Now she surprised them both by saying vehemently, "Bad man, kill dog, find him." Her amber eyes blazed with passion, and she was squeezing Scuto's neck so tightly that he whimpered and rolled his eyes at her. Flavia looked at Nubia and then turned to Jonathan. "Do you want to find the person who killed your dog?" she asked him. He looked up at her, and his eyes were blazing. "Yes." "Then it's settled," said Flavia calmly. "We will solve this mystery together, and together we will find the killer." Flavia decided that they should begin their quest for justice by interviewing possible witnesses. Wax tablet in hand, and flanked by Jonathan and Nubia, she began in the kitchen. Alma assured them that she had heard nothing suspicious while they were out, though she did remark that Bobus barked so often she barely noticed it. Next they searched for Caudex. They found him in the garden, snipping the dead heads off roses. When questioned, he confessed that he had been dozing. "Just a little nap in my room, as I usually have after lunch," he admitted, and after a pause, "I could easily have heard if anyone had knocked on our door." The only other possible witness was Libitus, Claudius's freedman. Flavia remembered that he had been standing by the fountain on the corner when they had returned from the river harbour. They caught Libitus just as he left the house, on his way to the baths. "Around noon?" he said, as they fell into step beside him. "Yes. As a matter of fact, I did see someone. It was just before you came back from the harbour. I was drinking at the fountain, and a man went running past. He looked very frightened, and he was carrying a leather bag. I distinctly remember the leather bag. For some reason it reminded me of Perseus with the head of Medusa." "What Perseus?" whispered Nubia to Flavia. "Perseus was a hero who had to kill a monster named Medusa, a gorgon. He'd cut off her head." Flavia made a chopping motion with her hand, "and he put it out of sight in a bag." She mimed that too, and then added in Greek, "In myth, monster's head in bag." Nubia understood. "Perseus killed." "Yes, Perseus killed her." Flavia turned back to the freedman. "Libitus," she said gravely, "today someone killed Jonathan's watchdog and cut off his head. The head is still missing." "By Hercules," gasped Libitus, and stopped dead in his tracks. "That is the impression I got exactly, of a head in a bag." "What did the man look like?" Jonathan asked. Libitus shrugged and began walking again. "Just average, really. Clean shaven, medium height, light tunic, short, dark cloak. I can't remember much more than that." They were approaching the centre of town, and the streets were becoming more crowded. They all stood back to let a man pushing a handcart full of melons go past. "I really must hurry," said Libitus. "I'm meeting someone at the baths." "Just one more question," said Flavia. "Do you remember which way he went at the crossroads? To the port, to the graves, or to the forum?" "Yes, I do remember that," said Libitus, frowning pensively. "I remember I thought it curious at the time. He was heading towards the tombs." It was the hottest time of the day. Hidden in the sun-bleached grasses of the necropolis, if you remember, that was the city of the dead, a name for the massive graveyard outside the city walls. Flavia, Jonathan and Nubia, with Scuto romping ahead, proceeded somewhat fearfully along a dirt road flanked by cypress trees and tombs. Although their houses backed directly onto the graveyard, they had approached by means of the gate and road that the running man must have taken. The road was not much used, and the tombs on either side of it were overgrown and untended. Here and there were the usual piles of rubbish that accumulated outside the gates of any Roman town. Pottery shards, old sandals, broken furniture, and clothes too tattered for the second-hand store. What about the wild dogs who attacked us a few days ago? Flavia looked around nervously. I don't want to meet them again. I've been hunting lots of times in the graveyard, and that was the only time I've seen them. We'll just have to take the risk. Besides, Jonathan added, we want to find clues while they are fresh. As they walked, they looked right and left, and especially down, for any telltale drops of blood. Scuto, who had begun by running back and forth to smell interesting smells, was now plodding down the middle of the road with his tail down, panting in the afternoon heat. Suddenly he stopped, looked to his left, and wagged his tail. Over there, said Jonathan, pointing. He sees something. Scuto, tail still wagging, led them through the tombs to a small clearing among the pine and cypress trees. Beside a miniature tomb, lit by dappled sunlight, sat a man with short dark hair and a pale yellow tunic. He sat cross-legged with his back to them, and they could hear sobs and see his shoulders trembling. As they came nearer, the man heard them and turned. His face was red with crying, and his mouth turned down like an actor's tragic mask. Heavy eyebrows joined above his nose to form one dark line. Flavia had never seen such misery before. But his misery turned to rage when he saw the little group. He rose to his feet, and pointing a finger at Scuto, he screamed, "Get that animal away from me! Get him away or I'll kill him! I hate dogs! I hate them all!"